So, my name is Aoife, and I am a transformational health coach for highly sensitive women. I help highly sensitive women to heal themselves from chronic pain, chronic illness, anxiety, and depression using mind body techniques, because this is what saved me and helped me to transform 3 decades of chronic pain and illness. So today we have Dr. Dave Clarke, and hey, it's such an honor to have you here, and I'm super grateful that you are sharing your time and wisdom with us. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you are a medical doctor, a gastroenterologist.
That's right. Yes. I'm certified in internal medicine and gastroenterology and practiced for decades and decades.
Amazing. And you wrote this incredible book called They Can't Find Anything Wrong: 7 Keys to Understanding, Treating, and Healing Stress Illness. And this is so incredible for me because I spent 30 years of my life having these exact words said to me. They can't find anything wrong. And I only read your book recently, and I noticed it was published a long time ago. So I have to believe in divine timing, that the information reaches you at the right time. But yeah, so I'm dying to chat with you about so many aspects of this stress illness and how we can heal ourselves, and help each other by understanding stress as the root of a lot of illness.
Yeah, thank you. I love to spread the word about this. That book is based on interviews with over 7,000 people. So this is a condition you're talking about is very common. And if anything, there are more copies of that book going out today than there were when it first came out.
That's amazing. I think the internet has really allowed for word to spread fast, and also people are suffering so much with this condition of they can't find anything wrong. And so for me, when I was a child, it was stomach pains that I complained of, and I spent years having x-rays and scans and scopes, and tests, endless tests. And I was diagnosed by a top pediatrician as mystery girl.
Ah, yeah, this is the problem. I mean, I was trained the same way that if you have disease or illness, that it must be coming about because of, if you have pain or illness, it must be coming about because of injury or disease. But there's a whole other category, which is symptoms generated by the brain. And we are not training our healthcare professionals to look there. We're sort of looking around like we've lost our keys. We're looking where the light is, but not where we dropped our keys. That's why we get so many patients who are endlessly in the healthcare system going from pillar to post and never getting the right answer. I was very lucky. I found out about this early in my career, but it shocked me. I mean, I was in my 8th year of training. Everything was going well. I got an award for excellence in medical school. I got into a top hospital training program. I was passing my exams with flying colors. And then all of a sudden, I encountered a patient like yourself whom nobody knew what to do for. She had been averaging one bowel movement per month for 2 years, and every single test was normal. And we did a very specialized test where I was in training at UCLA, when we were all convinced it was going to be abnormal, because there was nothing, no other possible explanation as far as we were concerned, that this test was going to show what her problem was. And then that test was normal too. And we were all just stunned. And I was doing her exit interview and happened to ask her about stress, but thought it was a waste of time because everybody else had asked her about stress. And she didn't have any. She was happily married. She had 2 kids. She enjoyed her job. And so then I asked her about stress earlier, thinking, well, maybe she experienced something just before her illness began, which is actually a common phenomenon in people with mind-body illness. And she had interpreted the question to mean the more remote past and began telling me about her sexual abuse, which was severe. And I'd never heard that from a patient before. I had no training in either asking questions about that or in how to respond to a patient who was telling me about this. It didn't seem like it was bothering her. She was explaining in detail exactly what had happened, even though it was horrible. She was using the same tone of voice you'd use to read a grocery list. And so I thought, well, uh, she's probably processed this, she's overcome this trauma, and yet she had this unexplained severe gastrointestinal condition. So I was completely at a loss for what to do, but I had fortunately heard about a psychiatrist at UCLA who was certified in medicine as well, which is quite unusual, who had an interest in patients with this sort of problem. And I was just grateful to have a place to pass the buck. I didn't think anything was going to come of it. No mere psychiatrist was going to be able to address a patient with an illness as severe as this. And I just, passed her on, forgot all about her until I ran into Dr. Kaplan, the psychiatrist, Harriet Kaplan, in an elevator few months later, and just to make conversation said, whatever happened to that patient that I referred to you? And she said, oh, I haven't seen her in a couple of weeks now, Dave. She's fine. Her constipation is completely relieved. She's no longer taking the 4 different laxatives at double the usual doses that she was taking before. And I just went, how is that possible? I got off the elevator and I said, Harriet, how did you do that? It blew my mind, frankly. Nothing. I mean, I'm 8 years into my training, and nobody has ever told me that you can alleviate a serious condition just by talking to somebody. So I I prevailed on Harriet to teach me what she knew, and she gave me a basic framework. And I thought, if I'm going to be a complete doctor, I should know how to at least begin the process of managing this problem. But unfortunately, when I got to Portland, Oregon to begin my career, there were no Harriet Kaplans here. And the patients had to, I'd sent them off to mental health and they got cognitive behavioral therapy. And as I'm sure you're aware, that isn't the best form of treatment for this condition. And so many of them came back and said, I'm not any better. Can you help me? And so I tried to help. And even as a bumbling beginner, people were getting better. And it was very rewarding work. And so I kept on with it. And now we're 7,000 patients later.
I love this. I love this so much. And thank you so much for your contribution to this. And thank you for helping those people. And yeah, so I can relate. When people asked me if I was stressed, I felt really defensive because I had done a lot of psychological work. I had psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. I had part of a meditation community for a long time. I was living like a monk, like I had stopped drinking and partying, and I was just on this like complete health freak path. So when I was still in my early 30s, still getting these scopes and still getting these tests and still being told they can't find anything wrong, when someone suggested to me, I remember a consultant doctor, he had done the scope and he said, you can't find anything wrong. And he did mention stress. And I felt so defensive because I felt like I was stressed because I was sick, but I was very confused about what do you mean, like what this stress was. And this happens now when I have clients come to me and I see or ask them that they're stressed, if they're stressed, or ask them about stress, they can be often say no. So what I've come to understand is like it's a subconscious stress. It's this kind of like baseline stress that I was so used to living with. And I didn't, no matter how many external things I changed, if I moved where I lived or I changed what I ate, because of the stomach, right? I had this whole stomach thing and fibromyalgia. no matter what I changed externally, this stress was still bubbling up, and it was happening subconscious for me. And so that was really a breakthrough for me.
The breakthrough was understanding that you had subconscious stress.
Yeah, that I had subconscious stress, and that there was, for me, there was patterns and belief systems that I had, and ways that I was living and seeing living in the world, and ways that I was seeing myself that were generating more and more stress. So like, through whatever happened for me in my childhood, I had absorbed these belief systems that I was, worthless, or I perfectionism, a really loud inner critic, a lot of shame. I grew up in Ireland, and we have our own cultural shame. So like, I had all these belief systems. So no matter what I did externally or in my here and now life to try and reduce my stress, I had this kind of like lens that I was living life through, that and patterns and habits of relating that were generating a lot of stress for me. So I kind of decided to call that subconscious stress. So for me, accessing then and starting to really see those patterns and those belief systems and those lenses and those ways that I was living life in a way that was generating a huge amount of stress for me, that has helped me to break free from lots of symptoms.
Yes, I mean, you just there in about 3 minutes captured the essence of what was affecting thousands of my patients. One way we can look at this is that humanity is distinguished from other creatures on the planet by our capacity for learning. And we probably the single most important thing that we learn about is ourselves, who we are, what we're good at, what we're not good at it, our value as human beings. And we have to absorb that from our early environment. And we do. And if we grow up in a healthy environment, well, we grow up with a healthy sense of ourselves as valuable human beings. But my patients grow up in an unhealthy environment that sends them a message that they are not as worthy as other people, that they are second rate, or they're worthless. And what does a child do when it is being given that message? The child will absorb that as a basic assumption about who they are, and they will try to react against it as best they can. They will try to be the best little kid that they can be, in hopes of getting a different message from the world. They will be very critical of themselves when they fall short of their extremely high standards. When nothing you do is ever good enough, the response to that is perfectionism. The ability to express negative emotions is usually curtailed in these environments. It doesn't do you any good. In fact, it makes things worse if you express anger or fear. And so those emotions tend to get repressed. And because none of us has a parallel life to compare with, all of these things come to seem as, relatively normal. We don't perceive them as being excessively burdensome. And so we carry it with us, well into the adult years. One of my patients was still affected by her childhood experiences at the age of 87. And yet, once a discussion happened about the impact of those experiences, she was able to make progress even at that age. So we can unlearn these assumptions. We can recognize that they are assumptions about ourselves that are harming us. We can come to understand how those false ideas were implanted in us, and we can change them. And in my practice, it facilitates that change if you see where it came from. If you can identify all the toxicities that were present in your early environment and say, this was not right. And one of the best ways to do that is to imagine a child of your own growing up in the same environment. And, I often ask my patients to imagine themselves as a butterfly on the wall of their childhood home. And they are watching some other child, either their own or some other child that they care about, trying to cope with that environment, even for just a week or 10 days. And what would it be like to have to watch that happen? And you're a butterfly on the wall. You can't intervene. You can't do anything about it. You just have to watch it. And people oftentimes will recognize that they get emotional about that. They have an emotional reaction to watching that they did not have for themselves. But when they see an innocent child having to cope with the same issues, they recognize that it wasn't right, that they feel anger about what the child had to go through. And they can begin to understand that they can make changes in response to that, that the assumptions that were implanted in them at that time can be changed because they were false at the time and they still are today.
I love that approach that you take because I also do that. I love children. I love working with children. So I also do that with my clients, and I always do it with myself as well now. I think of myself as a little child. And what I find this approach does is it brings in like a compassion and a kindness that I certainly did not have for myself. When you talk about that high expectation, I just had such like insanely high expectation of myself in all situations and of others, and it made relationships for me really difficult also. But I certainly was just lacking this self-compassion. Like, I actually made a therapist cry once when I told her just the average contents of my brain. She was so shocked that I spoke so harshly and was so hard on myself. And when I started the mind body healing as well, even though I got these like kind of miraculous results very early on, I healed my IBS just from like reading Dr. Schubner's book. And I had IBS for 30 years, and I healed all these food intolerances. But I still had a journey to go because I kind of even did the healing with brute force and just sheer determination. But I was like, this is gonna work. It's just your brain. And like, but then it was like, well, actually, after that, I got worse anxiety and the symptoms kind of like moved around, and there was no escaping the symptoms until I was able to show myself some kindness and some compassion. And what you say about being like a butterfly in the wall and thinking of the past, and seeing myself as a child, that for me, I find is a great way to access that compassion when you can't find it for yourself. So yeah, I really love how you do that.
Yeah, it's another aspect of that healing that I like my patients to try to do is to uh, recognize the heroic perseverance that was needed to endure that early environment, to have respect for that child that had to put up with that not just for a week or 10 days, but often for their entire childhood, close to 1,000 weeks if you do the math. And once people can begin to think about their early environment as the moral equivalent of being born in a dangerous jungle or being born on the far side of Mount Everest, and giving themselves credit for having found their way out of that environment when they had, little choice about where they were. And like I say, the heroic perseverance that was needed to endure all of that, you can begin to flip your self-image from one of being second rate or worthless to someone who has been heroic. To think of yourself as the way you would think about somebody who has climbed Mount Everest or done some other remarkable feat for a good cause. And that change in self-image has ripple effects in many other areas of life. You can be less critical of yourself. You don't have to be a perfectionist anymore. You can begin to take regular time that has no purpose but your own joy. So many of my patients are living lives as if on a treadmill that they never step off. They are just going and going and going until their body finally protests and they get fatigue or they get a physical symptom. But if you get off that treadmill and you say, I am just going to play for the next afternoon, I'm going to do something that has no purpose but my own joy, that is the moral equivalent of finger paints for a 4-year-old. That 4-year-old doesn't care about the quality of the work. They don't care if the picture's any good. They don't care who sees it. They don't care about any aspect of it except that they're having a lot of fun with it. And every human being needs that in their life. It's an essential human skill to be able to do that. But if you are a worthless person who has to constantly push to fight against the world, you're going to feel incredibly guilty if you take personal joy time like that. And yet, if you don't, sooner or later, your body will let you know.
Definitely. Oh my God, the guilt is huge, especially me. I have this story, and a lot of my clients do as well, that their kind of purpose is to take care of others, to be a caretaker and diminish their own needs. And when I first was confronted with that idea of what do you enjoy to do, how can you enjoy yourself, I honestly didn't know. I didn't know what to say. I had been I was so far away from myself. So in order to access that, I use the child thing as well. And I would imagine myself. And sometimes when I don't know what to do with myself, I still do this. I imagine what my 5-year-old self would want to do, because kids just, they know what they love. They know when they want ice cream, they want to play, they want to sleep, what they just know. So I always like tune into what, if I'm feeling stressed or sad or something, I always tune into that child. And that's how I got there, because at first when I was confronted with, well, what do you like to do? I just didn't know. Because everything that I thought I liked to do was very much wrapped up in like pleasing others and achieving, and also being part of a gang or a group of people. And I felt like I just didn't know who I was. So for me, I always tune in. I have like a few pictures of myself from when I was a child, and what would she like to be doing? And definitely she'd probably be finger painting or mucking around in nature, or eating ice cream. So yeah, but the guilt really does get to people when you have a very strong belief system that you are to be like busy all the time or achieving all the time, or taking care of others. It can really affect people. So I also do this work of changing the self-image. And I love how you say in your book that you give your patients, you write that they're a hero on the back of a card you send them. So they're getting that message. And I also go on this journey with my clients where I help them to change their self-image and see their past differently, because I was punishing myself. I was 30 years old, and I was punishing myself for things I did when I was like 9 years old or 7 years old. These memories just haunted me. I thought I was such a bad kid. I thought I was such a bad person. And I really had to just rewrite that for myself.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you had a child of your own and I somehow forced you for a week to raise that child exactly the way you were raised, and how you would feel at the end of that week. I mean, it would demonstrate just how difficult it was. And you've also pointed out a response that a lot of kids have to a difficult childhood environment, which is to try to take care of the needs of others. If there are problems in the household, even a young child will try to fix them, and that becomes a habit. It becomes a focus for people, it affects their personal relationships. The kinds of people that they fall into close personal relationships with tend to have problems that need solving, and consequently you end up with in relationships with people who do not give back to you what you are giving to them. They are unbalanced. Instead of 50-50 mutual support, they're more like, 90-10 or 95-5 in favor of the other person. And, that's not a sustainable or healthy relationship. So I try to encourage my patients to just accept that they should put themselves on the list of people they take care of. Yes, it's okay to take care of other people, but make sure you're on that list so that you take some time for that. And the hero idea can help alleviate the guilt, and that's why I use that technique of I'll take an index card and write the person's name, and I'll say Aoife is a hero, exclamation point, and ask them to tape it to their bathroom mirror as a daily affirmation or a daily reminder, because it's quite a flip in self-image if you've grown up feeling worthless or second rate, to suddenly start thinking of yourself as having overcome a heroic having done a heroic feat to overcome a large burden. But once you get there, once you can look back on your childhood experience as just something through no fault of your own was inflicted on you, and it's very unfortunate that it had to be that way. But if you can at least look back on it as something that demonstrates your own inner core of strength, it makes all the difference. It especially makes a difference in personal relationships. Once you are thinking of yourself in these very positive terms, you won't tolerate anybody in your life that doesn't agree with you. And sooner or later, somebody is going to come along who recognizes how amazing you are. And they will be completely different than people you've been in relationships with in the past. And I've seen that happen over and over again, even to people who are not necessarily looking for a new relationship. They just sort of happen.
That's so beautiful. And something else that you write about in your book that I absolutely love is the I deserve better phase. And so this is like when you start to change and you start to attract different relationships or different experiences, and you maybe have like symptoms arise or panic arise because it's am I correct in that that's how you describe it? Because it's a new experience.
Yes, you've touched on a couple of things there. People who have survived these very difficult childhood environments, they do acquire a number of characteristics and personality traits that the rest of the world really likes. I mean, they work really hard. They pay attention to details. They're very responsible. They're very supportive of others in their immediate world and environment. And the world loves people like that. I mean, they're exactly the kind of people that you want to have as your friend, your neighbor, your supervisor, your coworker. And they get positive feedback from the world outside of their family around that. They get excellent evaluations in the workplace. They get people not in the close personal or romantic relationships, but their friends give them a lot of positive feedback as well. And so their self-esteem, which typically as a child is very low, begins to improve. And eventually it does get to the point where, they reach a conclusion that they deserve to be treated better than they have been. And they become less tolerant of any family members who've treated them poorly. If they're in a relationship that's one of those 95-5 where the other person has a lot of problems and isn't very supportive, they become less tolerant of that. And they may end up severing that relationship, for example. And they can eventually meet somebody who is, as I said before, supportive, who is recognizes the wonderful qualities that the person has acquired from their heroic perseverance as a kid. And that's obviously a great thing. We love to see people reach a point in their lives where they have a wonderful supportive person like that to be close to. But in the very short term, when that relationship is just getting started, it can be stressful because the person has not been in a relationship like that before. It They wonder if they can trust it, if the other person is going to wake up one day and say, no, you're not really who I wanted to be with after all. And there can be a certain amount of anxiety around that. And it's not unusual for me to see patients whose physical symptoms actually begin in coinciding with this positive relationship in their life. It's what I call the good partner, bad illness syndrome. The other reason that a good personal relationship for the first time can be stressful is that it contrasts with the past. If you were treated badly in your family growing up, and now all of a sudden you have this wonderful person who tells you you're wonderful and behaves in a way that is proves that they think you're wonderful, and is willing to be as supportive of you as you are of them. What a difference it is for so many of my patients with what they grew up with. And you can't escape the conclusion that if you deserve this person in your life, this good person that you have in your life today, then you did not deserve to be mistreated as a child. And it stirs up the anger. And if you grew up learning how to suppress that anger, then where does it go? You're not even consciously aware of it. So it begins to express itself via your body because it can't be expressed in words because you don't know how. And so many of my patients, I'll always remember one. I mean, I was doing her abdominal examination. She was lying on the exam table and her hands were next to her hips. And she had this very nice diamond ring on her left hand. And I just commented on it while I was doing her exam. It's a beautiful ring. And it turned out that she'd gotten engaged 2 days before she became ill. And I said, aha, I'll bet this is the good partner, bad illness syndrome. And sure enough, I mean, this was the first positive relationship in her life. All her other boyfriends had been rotten. Her childhood had been miserable. She had all of these things going on. She still, even 6 months later, with this incredible ring on her finger, still had anxiety that things were not going to work out. And of course, she had anger about how she'd been mistreated as a child, that she had no conscious awareness that that was going on.
I find that so interesting for so many reasons that I can relate to, but I feel like I get this I deserve better experience, not in a relationship, but in life. When I start to, what I just say, up level or upgrade, I start to upgrade and I maybe have like a positive financial situation or a positive living situation, and I can go down, like my mood goes down, I don't feel so great, and then I start to adjust. But I really related to that to that I deserve better phase, that when it's like I step into something and I think like, whoa, do I really deserve this? Is this? And then there is probably the contrast of like, well, I didn't have this in the past because I didn't think I deserved better. So I just call it when I up level, like that this kind of wobble happens, this time of adjusting happens for me.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a good partner that does this. It can be anything that affirms you, that affirms your life, that feeds back from the world to tell you that you are doing things well. Another one of my patients, he got the Employee of the Year award at his company. It was, they had 400 employees, and he got the award for that year. And after that, he became ill. Another patient had four wonderful things happen to her in her life in the space of about 6 months, which was, let's see now if I can remember. She got her PhD. She got a really good job. She got married, I think, and she adopted a child. Four really wonderful things, all in the space of about 6, 8 months, and that was when she became ill. So yeah, it can be anything that's life affirming can trigger this phenomenon.
So interesting. So just to,
Speaking of which, I should mention, since I said the word trigger, that's a third, the three big things that happen to people who've been mistreated as children that can make them ill as an adults are the personality traits, the unrecognized negative emotions, anger, fear, shame, grief, or guilt, and then the triggers. And the triggers can be a person, such as an abusive parent who's still in your life. It can be a situation or an event, something that in some way links back to experiences that you had as a kid or is reminiscent of experiences that were painful or traumatizing that you had as a kid that occur in your life at the moment that can trigger the development of symptoms.
So they trigger that old belief, the shame, the memory, anything.
Yes, and they trigger the emotions connected to it. Dr. Schubiner, whom you mentioned earlier, tells a story about a patient who developed pain in his right hand, and to make his story short, his supervisor in the workplace was treating him badly in a way that was very reminiscent of how his own father had treated him. And he began to feel like when he was in the presence of this supervisor that he wanted to punch the person in the face. And he knew he couldn't do that because number one, it was a supervisor. Number two, it was a woman, and so he had to somehow suppress his urge to punch this person, and it manifested in a painful hand.
His hand, yeah. It's amazing. What else did I want you to talk about? Oh yeah, so an aspect of this journey that you talk about is becoming who you truly are. And just connecting, like you mentioned earlier, connecting to your joy and like who you really are. So yeah, do you have anything to share on that?
Yeah, becoming the person that you were meant to be. If you had grown up in a healthy environment, one that was supportive of you, one that made you feel good about yourself, one that um, emphasized the strong positive qualities that you have, what kind of person would you have turned out to be? And people can still go to that place. They can still become that person. And the way to do that is to um, one by one remove the assumptions about yourself that are false, and the assumptions that were um, absorbed by you because you were in an unhealthy environment. That's the journey that my patients are on, and it's one of the wonderful aspects of this work is that not only are we helping alleviate symptoms, which is our job as medical clinicians, but we are also changing people's lives. We're changing who they are as uh, because it's directly part of the journey of leaving the symptoms in the past. And it's wonderful to see it. People's relationships change. What they choose to do with their lives changes. And the way they think about themselves as people changes. I mean, just to see someone recognize how much they overcame and to recognize that they're not weak, they're not, psychologically deficient, that they've just been carrying 200 pounds of stress on their shoulders. And, anybody would feel weak if they had to carry 200 pounds around all day that they didn't know was there. And then when you put those 200 pounds down, then you see how strong you actually were
That's so beautiful.
and are.
Yeah. And this is the best part of the journey for me, because if you met me 5 years ago and I was so ill, I couldn't eat food barely at all. And I was so suicidal and I was so miserable. And if you met me, I would have taken my life. And you said, like, you have one wish granted, right? I would have taken my life exactly as it was. And I just wanted the symptoms to go. That's all I wanted. It's all I could think about. But what I got was so much better, because all levels of my life just transformed, and my relationships, like you said, and just like starting to really step into my passions and interests and who I'm truly meant to be, and just life becoming so much richer and experiencing peace and joy and much more love and connection, and life becoming so much more interesting than the symptoms, and before, all I could think about and all I could talk about, I was so stressed out being so sick, and having not having any solutions meant that I am sorry, that I had to take everything into my own hands, because there was no other solutions really for my condition. So that was a real burden. That everything just felt like such a burden, like that 200 pounds of stress that you're describing. So the becoming who you're truly meant to be part is it's like getting more bang for your buck or something. It's such a magical part of the journey. So yeah, I'm super grateful for that. And I also love how you shared about your client who was in your patient who was in her 80s. And I'd love you to talk a little bit, the last few minutes that we have, about how it's never too late to heal.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. She was remarkable in the duration of her illness, 79 years. And of course, she'd been through, the healthcare system countless times. She actually worked as a nurse, so she was very close to the healthcare system. But her story was that she grew up in a remote farming community in a valley in the Rocky Mountains of the western United States, in the state of Idaho, which is in the Northwest. And this was in probably the 1920s, and large family. She was the oldest, and when she was 6 years old, a baby was born, and the family was very busy, so she was given care of the child. She was 6 years old, and basically took care of the baby like any other 6-year-old girl would take care of a doll. But in this case, it was a live human being, and she would, feed the child, change the child's diapers, sleep with the child, just almost 24/7 caring for that baby, which is, a lot to put on a 6-year-old, obviously. Well, she did this for 2.5 years, and then tragically, the baby developed appendicitis. And this was in a remote area in the era before antibiotics, and the baby died. And of course, she felt completely responsible, even though there was nothing anybody could have done. Even if the baby had lived in an urban area, it might not have survived that. But she just felt horrible about it. She was in shock. And at the funeral, an uncle pointed out that she was the only one in the church who wasn't crying, which just sent her guilt level completely off the scale. And, the reason she wasn't crying was that she was still in shock. I mean, that, having been with this baby for its entire life and then suddenly to lose it, I cannot even imagine. So her response to this was to try to, as children do whatever they can to make the situation better, to overcome their perceived shortcomings, the perfectionism and so forth. And she began taking care of a newborn on a neighboring farm almost right away, and continued to do work like that throughout her childhood. No surprise that she chose as her career to be a pediatric nurse. She had 4 children of her own, and I'm sure she watched them all like a hawk. All 4 survived to adulthood, fortunately. But she began having stomach pains, almost right away after that first baby had died. And she had the stomach pains, regularly, a couple of times a week for the rest of her life, basically. And finally found her way to my office just for one more consultation on top of, countless others that she'd had. And when she told me that she'd been having stomach pain since the age of 8, it was pretty obvious that I needed to find out if anything stressful had happened to her at age 8. And that's when she told me this story of this terrible tragedy. So what I had her do as treatment was to write a letter to the dead infant, and express her thoughts and feelings to that child, because I don't think she had ever done that. She no doubt had abundant feelings of guilt and remorse that had never been expressed in words. And so I said, this is, absolutely what you need to do. I think these feelings are still in there, even after all these decades, and that they are being manifested in your body instead of in words. And we need to change that. We need to move them from somatic expression, bodily expression, into verbal expression. And, I can't say that she got 100% relief from that, but she definitely got, I would say, 60 or 70% relief of her symptoms from having done that. Our neuroplasticity, the capacity of the brain to change is not as great as we age. But even at age 87, she was able to make significant progress.
That's amazing. Amazing that she was able to do that. And what a story. I can't imagine her little 2-year-old looking after baby. Um, yeah, that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing all of those amazing stories and all of your wisdom. It's
Yeah,
so,
it
yeah,
does show that those physical symptoms, they, in a way, they're kind of like a friend, as bad as they are. They're trying to tell us something. And if we have the heart to hear the message, it can help us.
definitely. Yeah. And it just blew my mind finding this teaching, because my whole life I had been looking towards food to heal the stomach problems, which, made logical sense. And
Absolutely.
then to just make this shift has completely transformed my life. And by the sounds of it, so many other people that have had the good fortune to be able to work with you. And yeah, thank you for your amazing book, and thank you for all the amazing work that you've done. And it's just been such an honor to connect with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I should have mentioned closer to the beginning the website for the Psychophysiologic Disorders Association, which is our nonprofit that tries to educate the public and healthcare professionals. And we got a lot of resources on there, and easiest to remember is endchronicpain.org.
Amazing. And I'll put all those links in the comments for
Thank you.
anyone to get in touch with. And your other website is stressillness.com.
Stressillness.com is the website for the book. Yes.
Yeah. So there's loads of amazing resources for people to start to educate, because that really is where everything starts to shift, right? When you start to learn and hear these stories and be inspired, and also just to get a bit of hope, because I know for me there felt like there was no hope for so long. So yeah.
Yeah, and people, you go to the experts and they tell you we can't find anything wrong. You're going to have to live with this. There's nothing we can do. And it's 1 in 6 adults. It's 40% of people who go to the doctor. The numbers are enormous. In the United States, it's 40 million people. In Ireland, it's probably at least 1 million. So we have a long way to go to educate our fellow healthcare professionals, but we've now got very good science, randomized controlled trials that are showing remarkable outcomes from this approach and doing them in a scientifically rigorous way. So that, I think, is going to persuade my fellow healthcare professionals that they need to make some changes.
Okay. That's really exciting. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dave Clarke. And yeah, I will leave all of those links in the comments so that people can access those free resources and educate themselves and get some help for whatever circumstances they're facing at the moment.
Thanks, Aoife, for doing these interviews. I really appreciate your help in spreading the word.
Thank you.